Oh my God. Did you see what Peter Coffin said on Twitter? To say the least, it was not it, Chief. Bad take. Like, what can I say? But yikes. Cringe. Lag off. Touch grass. Delete your account. You know, the world would be better if Peter just got COVID. No one loves you. No one loves you. You deserve to contract terminal cancer. Eat shit and die. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck you. Someone should call 911 and report a hostage situation at your address and claim you have a shotgun. Check out this picture of Peter in the store. You know, Peter should kill himself. Kill yourself, Peter. Kill yourself. Kill yourself because of the thing you said on Twitter. Well, that got dark quick, didn't it? It tends to. Cancel culture, cancel culture, cancel culture. You say it 3 times and like Beetlejuice, you summon a horde of terminally online people to tell you that cancel culture isn't real. Also, it's actually good, but not real, but good. Now someone's going to say that I'm a MAGA, Gamergator, red, brown, white supremacist, class reductionist, Strasserite, Noswell, fascist, Duganist, or whatever for saying cancel culture is real. But it is. Oh, is it ever? Like the Pope even says it's real.
Si va elaborando un pensiero unico, pericoloso, e che oggi assume sempre più la forma di quella cancel culture che invade tanti ambiti e istituzioni pubbliche. In nome della protezione delle diversità si finisce per cancellare il senso di ogni identità, con il rischio di far tacere le posizioni che difendono un'idea rispettosa ed equilibrata delle varie sensibilità.
Now, just to put it out there, I don't agree with the Pope on everything. Probably the most glaringly obvious disagreement I have with the Catholic Pope, supposedly God's primary messenger in the human world, is his horny on main etiquette. Like, someone needs to rein him in on Instagram. Like, liking all those booty shots is not particularly papal. Further, I think he misses the most important component of cancel culture, which is that it's not really a culture or the customs of a particular social group, but more a set of dynamics, specifically market dynamics. To label them as a culture, I feel, is to compartmentalize a very visible set of behaviors which are simply a part of the justifying ideology of our society, neoliberalism. Cancel culture channels a desire the powerless have for justice into something profitable and is ultimately a means for those with power to avoid scrutiny while working to keep society atomized. Cancel culture is not simply a modern form of ostracism in which somebody is thrust out of social or professional circles as it's defined on Wikipedia either. Its existence, in my opinion, is a logical, necessary outcome in a capitalist society which depends on market fetishizing ideology for justification. In a world where everything is commodified, where relationships and interactions have become transactionalized, I believe cancel culture is a subscription dynamic playing out in social spaces, ultimately transforming people into a mix of consumer, marketer, police, judge, jury, prisoner, and guard. It's the consolidation and Uberification of these roles in society, and the reward for keeping people in line is attention and social connections. The result feels a lot like overgrown, overzealous hall monitors doing ideological maintenance for the ruling class. And they are always ready to call for backup.
We're killing strangers! We're killing strangers! We're killing strangers so we don't kill the ones that we love!
So, canceling, according to Urban Dictionary, is to stop giving support to a person. The act of canceling could entail boycotting an actor's movies or no longer reading or promoting a writer's works. This definition is workable, but I think we need to add a couple of things. First, it's not necessary for the target to be a famous or notable person, or even a person at all.
Yes, I have made mistakes. So now what? I'm just supposed to
go away forever? I'm sorry, but that's bullshit.
This is where you find out who your real friends are. You think you owe them something, but these people enjoy seeing you fail because it lets them feel superior.
They could be a volunteer firefighter, a librarian, or even a corporate brand that's humanized themselves, like Wendy the Hamburger Broad. But as far as actual living humans go, Americans almost all have some kind of social media presence, and our accounts are available to everyone. So while notability isn't necessary, many people are now functionally a certain kind of limited-purpose public figure. Second, yes, canceling is certainly an act of withholding support, but just like the range of people it affects is broader than this definition accounts for, the process of canceling a person often goes a lot further. The way I see it, the goal is generally to brand someone persona non grata, an unacceptable or unwelcome person, and remove them from the space they occupy, whether physically or virtually. This could mean kicking someone out of an online community, or it could mean getting them fired from their jobs so they don't have the means to show up in polite society. It always involves the branding, though, as to attempt to make their punishment permanent. Now, I've seen a lot of different takes on where cancel culture comes from. The term canceling became popular thanks to a 2014 episode of a reality show, Love and Hip Hop New York. Music executive and record producer Cisco Rosado ended an argument with singer and then love interest Diamond Strawberry by saying, "You're canceled."
I came all the way out here to be with you. I'm not going nowhere.
Get away from me. You canceled.
Canceled?
Canceled.
You got me up. I'm not going nowhere.
This moment became a meme on Twitter almost immediately. Rosado notes that he said it because he had watched the 1991 film New Jack City the day before, which contains this clip.
You're a murderer, Nino! I've seen you kill too many people, Nino!
Cancel that bitch. I'll buy another.
So the term, or at least applying the term to a human being, comes from a Warner Brothers movie where Blade runs a mafia and was popularized by MTV, a Viacom subsidiary, capitalizing on one of their personalities having seen it. The punitive behavior, on the other hand, does not originate in modern media. There's a number of different proposed origins for the act of social ostracization and punishment, from religion to political movements to monarchy. When the Pope decided to say, cancel culture is real, a lot of people responded to him by saying, well, God started it. Many adding that hell or the Inquisition were the original cancel culture. I've seen some say it comes from Mao via the 1960s New Left, as well as from boycotting during the Civil Rights Movement.
Now, I don't want to provide an argument that's purely against these takes, as I think these behaviors that we might characterize as cancel culture do have historic precedent in left movements. But I don't think this phenomenon has sprung forth exclusively or even primarily from these sources. The former idea that cancel culture comes from Mao's Cultural Revolution by way of the 1960s New Left, I think leans too heavily on the assumption that cancel culture is primarily a problem of the left. And I don't really think that's the case.
Are you the manager? Bath and Body Works? What did you say again, ma'am? You said fuck Donald Trump?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Thank you.
Also, while some of the behaviors on display are comparable, I don't think the New Left's interpretation of Mao should really be seen as the progenitor. Now, the latter idea that cancel culture specifically originated from boycotting in the civil rights movement, I think that's just dumb.
This one was popularized by an article Vox published asserting that, while call-out culture came from fandom, cancel culture is completely different. The term came from black people, so you see, it is a different thing that must be anchored in the struggle for justice.
So here you might be thinking, now Peter, there's no way Vox actually said that. That's totally arbitrary and seems so off the rails. Pixar, it didn't happen.
It's common to compare cancel culture to call-out culture, but its real roots may lie in the civil rights movement. But while these ideas seem interchangeable at a glance, they're different in important ways. Call-out culture predates cancel culture as a concept, with online roots in early 2010s Tumblr fandom call-out blogs. Call-out culture is a term that arose within fandom. Meanwhile, cancel culture arose within Black culture and appears to channel Black empowerment movements dating as far back as the civil rights boycotts of the 1950s and 60s.
I'm sorry, what? So, Black people don't participate in or have anything to do with fandom? And fandom is somehow completely separate from politics? And the Montgomery bus boycott is cancel culture, despite the fact the terminology was never used at all, ever, even kind of, until like a few years ago?
Also, doesn't it come off a little strange to say that the heroism of the civil rights movement, organizing boycotts, withholding labor, and winning civil rights is the same thing as digging through a user's tweets from 10 years ago to get them fired or make them unpopular with people that like them?
And Charity Hudley, who studies Black vernacular and the use of language, likened the act of canceling someone to a boycott, but of a person rather than a business. She said it also promotes the idea that Black people should be empowered to reject pop culture that spreads harmful ideas.
So, at the beginning of all these quotes, the author asserted cancel culture and call-out culture are different in important ways. However, they don't provide any reason or logic as to why, other than they just distinguish between Tumblr and Black people.
Are you sure about that?
This contrast is entirely arbitrary, a distinction without a difference. Saying, well, that's Tumblr, but this is Black would maybe be enough if, one, the origins the author asserts made sense, which, I'm sorry, the Montgomery bus boycott in no way resembles what people are referring to when they say cancel culture, and two, that the mechanics people referred to as cancel culture and call-out culture weren't so obviously the same damn thing.
However, they are. Like, you know that pattern recognition thing that humans do? The names and actions denoted by call-out culture and cancel culture trigger that, don't they? Like, there's so obviously two words for one thing that it would be dumb to chalk it up to cultural difference. And that makes the racialization peculiar. And someone at Vox knows this is ridiculous, too, because they attempt to dissuade the reader from reading this article, instead referring them to a newer one which doesn't include this nonsensical distinction.
Editor's note, May 10th, 2021. The information in this story was last updated in August 2020. The discourse around cancel culture has evolved. See Vox's 2021 explainer on the cancel culture debate for more on the issue.
However, the newer 2021 article tacitly maintains the assertion that cancel culture has its roots in the civil rights movement, although the author, the same from the original, attempts to soften the bizarre racialization from the 2019 original and avoids directly claiming that cancel culture may come from Black empowerment movements, instead saying it has resonance with them.
As a term with roots in Black culture, it has some resonance with Black empowerment movements as far back as the civil rights boycotts of the 1950s and 60s. At its best, cancel culture has been about rectifying power imbalances and redistributing power to those who have little of it.
Kind of seems like a lot of hem-hawing around to say people with very little power collectivizing in an attempt to undermine a perceived injustice. So, is it that?
Justice, according to Wikipedia, is a concept of ethics and law where people behave in a way that is fair, equal, and balanced for everyone. This is a broad definition, but it demonstrates a key element of what enables cancel culture, that justice is a subjective ideal with no material basis. This definition also contains words that are subjective themselves. Fair doesn't have to mean marked by impartiality and honesty, free from self-interest, prejudice, or favoritism. According to Merriam-Webster, where I got that definition, it can also mean in agreement with merit or importance. And what is said to be meritorious often serves the structure of class society and therefore the capitalist ruling class's interests.
Hell, it's sometimes even really hard to get people to agree on a definition of everyone.
So, given there's a difference between what many people might mean by justice, let's consider that this concept may have a class character. Where a member of the working class, the proletariat, might trend towards a definition that sees people the same regardless of class, a member of the capitalist ruling class, the bourgeoisie, might trend towards one that justifies their position as above others. This difference in character present in the definitions of terminology means the bourgeoisie may say they're for whatever ideal, even genuinely, but that it means something different than what we in the proletariat mean. Since the power in a society rests with the ruling class, we must understand that the character which will persist is the one that the ruling class asserts. I think we can find that character in Plato's Republic, in which the philosopher puts forward that justice is the will to fulfill the duties of one's position and not to meddle with the duties of another. When you boil it down, Plato basically means, know your place, bitch.
Know your fucking place, trash.
I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. A person is just when they occupy the right place in society and or actively pursue that place in society. For example, a kingdom's subjects are where they should be, and so is the king. The subjects shouldn't meddle with the king's business. That's unjust. So, all revolutions, every single one, are by nature unjust in their time, as the various places people should occupy in the structure are already established. And further, in the present, we have a mechanism that tells us the cream always rises to the top, where the most useful people innovate and are rewarded with places of dominance. The market supposedly puts everyone and everything where they belong. Plato's justice is basically natural law, the idea that human beings possess intrinsic values that govern their reasoning and behavior. Although Plato didn't personally say, it's natural law, folks, and that's all there is to it. Basically, Plato believed that we live in an orderly universe. It follows that nature, or God, or biology, or whichever, pick one, makes individuals for a purpose, and therefore they have a natural position. When each person fulfills this, practicing one thing only, and that the thing to which his nature was best adopted, as Plato put it, the world is just. Consequently, in this just world, it's the philosophers, the elite smarties that should rule, because only they understand what is good, which, according to Plato, a philosopher, good cannot be clearly seen or explained.
Pretty convenient for Plato, a philosopher, to not have to explain why philosophers should rule. They just should.
Basically, the boss should be the boss. Homeless people are just lazy and should be on the street. The billionaire should be in their mansion, and the criminal should be in jail. Everyone in their place, right? That's justice. Should we talk about how people with disabilities are supposedly in their just place in a society that often ignores their disabilities? No? Do we want to talk about slavery in the context of people's just place? No?
That will get clipped and used to say I said the opposite of what I actually said. So just fill in the blanks. Justice.
Probably the most convenient thing about Plato's view on justice, though, is that it functions as a justification for pretty much every society in which there is a ruling class.
Now, it's basically Plato saying class society is just because know your place, bitch.
The market supposedly tells us what works and what doesn't, and therefore is a great sorting tool to realize what Plato might call a just world. Thing is, the market doesn't work the way it's represented to. Demand doesn't dictate supply, and the best people and stuff don't always or even often come out on top. Hardly fair by a proletarian definition. As Marx said,
Wat kept Produktion in tro, ormo orles tro, proportions? It was demand that dominated supply, that preceded it. Produktion followed close on the heels of consumption. Large-scale industry, forced by the very instruments at its disposal to produce on an ever-increasing scale, can no longer wait for demand. Produktion precedes Konsumption, supply compels demands.
And old Carl saying large-scale industry in 1847 is cute at this point. Industry has expanded to a scale Marx likely couldn't fathom. Demand is marketed into existence as those with the means to produce decide what to produce. This dynamic has pervaded every aspect of our lives, including
an unfair market acting as a divining rod to sort out society probably wouldn't match what most proletarians think justice is, which is likely a lot closer to the first definition from earlier, a concept of ethics in law where people behave in a way that is fair, equal, and balanced for everyone. And I think that somewhere deep inside, most people notice this contradiction. We know this arrangement can never be a just society, even though the proletariat might define justice as a concept of ethics and law where people behave in a way that is fair, equal, and balanced for everyone. The version of it that institutions, incentives, and the bourgeoisie, the capitalist ruling class, follow is the know your place, bitch one.
Justice, in the way the proletariat understands it, is an ideal that can only follow fundamental, qualitative change in the base of society. Just as with most other high-minded philosophical ponderings, this proletarian justice just isn't possible in a society materially divided into classes, ruled by the bourgeoisie. The primary contradiction of capitalism is the socialization of production without socializing who the final product and profit go to. This creates a situation where nothing is fair, balanced, or equal for anyone. If we want the ideal, we must first address the material. Alexandra Kollontai, the Commissar for Social Welfare in the post-revolution USSR, a Marxist-Leninist that feminists mistakenly claim as their own, so perfectly outlines this in an essay that's critiquing feminism, but ultimately bourgeois ideological struggles for quote-unquote justice.
The feminists seek equality in the framework of the existing class society. In no way do they attack the basis of this society. They fight for prerogatives for themselves without challenging the existing prerogatives and privileges. We do not accuse the representatives of the bourgeois women's movement of failure to understand the matter. Their view of things flows inevitably from their class position. Specific economic factors were behind the subordination of women. Natural qualities have been a secondary factor in this process. Only the complete disappearance of these factors, only the evolution of those forces which at some point in the past gave rise to the subjection of women, is able in a fundamental way to influence and change their social position. In other words, women can become truly free and equal only in a well-organized along new social and productive lines.
The base motive of justice suggests that cancel culture isn't evil or sociopathic, although the ensuing behavior often makes those characterizations feel apt. Although this base motive generally isn't something people can actually achieve through such means, I think it's worth considering. Often, when there isn't a way to achieve something without fundamental change, valid motives get redirected. Also, the injustices in question are, at times, genuinely very awful, like with R. Kelly or Harvey Weinstein, and at other times, they are not. Either way, unless the legal system gets involved, many liken it to a broad public denunciation, shaming, and mob justice, and therefore look to historical examples of each to explain it. If we're talking about denunciation, we might look back to the Spanish Inquisition. If we're talking about shaming, we might mention the pillories of kings and feudal lords. Many characterize cancel culture as mob justice, which we could go back to the Salem witch trials or lynching to look into. Also related, excommunication and public flogging. I think it makes sense that people link these things to cancel culture. They all feel very similar and ultimately work to enforce Plato's know your place, bitch concept of justice. Everyone stays in their place, and if they don't, they get what's coming to them.
Cancel that bitch.
But we miss a large part of the character of cancel culture if we act like any one of these things, or even some combination of them, explains it. Specifically, we must consider that they all have a character to them which mirrors their era and/or power structures. The pillory was a product of the Middle Ages, where authority was centered around a king. The Salem witch trials were instituted by a Puritan town. Lynching was a means to drive fear in Black Americans after chattel slavery was ended in the United States. One was excommunicated from the church for not following Roman Catholicism correctly. One was publicly flogged to show the other serfs or subjects what happens if one gets out of line. Basically, these are all punishments that keep the powerless polite, respectable, and law-abiding, and to keep them from finding too much sympathy with discontents or
the other.
Today's world is marked by a neoliberal, overarching ideology. This means the primary set of excuses for the way the world works is a fetishization of markets. Also, people are atomized, meaning the individual is the base unit of society, participating in markets in a number of ways. Social relations aren't arranged cooperatively, but so that we act alone, competitively, and primarily in self-interest. Almost everything that mediates our interactions manifests as some form of market, forcing an exchange dynamic into our everyday activity. Cancel culture is, as I said, related to all of the previously mentioned phenomena from Mao to pillories to New Jack City. However, the way it works, I believe, could not have existed in any prior time. I contend that a system of market incentives results in consumer-like behaviors which integrate with a diffusion of authority among those who accept the ruling class's ideology. To illustrate this, I'd like to give you another definition of cancel culture, this time from a marketer. In an interview, marketing executive Emma Monks put it this way.
The term cancel culture describes a mass online public reaction to perceived wrongs done by an individual or entity by withdrawing support or consumer patronage.
In the German ideology, Karl Marx said,
The ideas of the ruling class are, in every era, the ruling ideas.
Neoliberalism, probably the word that neoliberals hate the most, is the justifying ideology of this era of capitalism because the ruling class are neoliberal capitalists. So we have to investigate if cancel culture, an idea that has taken over in the mainstream political discussion, follows that ideology. Spoiler alert, it does.
There's always going to be members of society who do stuff that the rulers don't want them to. But in today's society, supposedly free thanks to the great market, if people were strapped to a pole and beaten in the town square when they said something along the lines of, the market is an unjust mechanism for appropriating resources and wealth, then it gets a lot harder to conflate the market with freedom. Despite being allowed to say something like that, in absolutely no sense is the market free. At all. Using any definition of the word. A market is an abstract or physical place in which commercial dealings are conducted. In a market, the exchange of commodities happens. In fact, the exchange itself is what makes something a commodity. To engage in an exchange, one must have something of value to buy and sell with. In the consumer market, one needs money to buy consumer goods. And in the real market, one needs capital. Now, capital isn't distributed evenly among classes in today's society, capitalism. In fact, that's the material basis for class, and why there's a class of capitalists called the bourgeoisie. In a society where modern conditions of production prevail, power comes from owning the means of production, and therefore the owning class has the power. And we can't have people figuring that out, can we? Things work much better if people think the market straightforwardly supplies what is demanded of it and that all aspects of our lives are trustable to this mechanism. The invisible hand is superior to human understanding, you see. Ignore all that privatization of the public sphere, that deregulation of the corporate sector, and that lowering of corporate taxes, paid for with cuts to public spending. Ignore it all.
This is the end of history, baby. That system shit, it's so 2000 and late.
Wait, are you trying to criticize institutionalized power? You're canceled. It's obviously not that straightforward, is it? Thus, rather than actual social dynamics which ultimately serve institutionalized power, cancel culture is more often portrayed in the media as a form of mob justice, the rabble getting out of control. I wouldn't just assert this is wrong. I would assert that most things characterized as mob justice generally serve institutionalized power. Take lynching in the U.S. South post-slavery. Now, you might think that racism is a simple one-word explanation for why that happened, and you wouldn't be wrong per se. That said, without specifying otherwise, we are incentivized to assume the motive of racism is simply individuals' opinions on race and nothing more. Racism, however, is much more complicated than that, and not just as an explanation for why lynching happened. While fear of the other, xenophobia, and demagoguery existed before the United States, and we might look back through history and characterize all of that as racism by the standards of today, we didn't really have the modern concept of race until someone invented race science, which, as you may know, is not so much actual science, but rather a justifying ideology for how the United States and its brand of capitalist society was being built at the time. You see, the Founding Fathers drew a map which pointed to the location of the national treasure. On the back of it, they chartered the Declaration of Independence, which explicitly stated that all men are created equal. Now, if all men were actually considered equal, then kidnapping a bunch, treating them as property, and forcing them into unpaid labor would be considered an atrocity. And that's a thing the early United States was doing a pretty large amount of, all things considered. So, how do you handle that cognitive dissonance? Well, you could cut that shit out. But that would also slow the development of your budding nation state, so any alternatives? What's that? Oh, you say creating scientific-sounding designations to rob people of their status as a human being?
Yeah, that could work.
Without the ideology of race science and institutional power promoting it, there wouldn't have been a formal designation of race as we know it today. And without race, the question of why are these people with darker skin treated as property if all men are created equal is more likely to be asked. It doesn't actually matter if slave owners believed in race science either. Many obviously did, as the ideology had the power of both state and capital behind it, which did condition many to believe it. Still, a slave owner could easily not believe in race science while continuing to enslave people to exploit their labor while the ideology justifies it to others for them. What mattered was that people were kept as slaves, which is an atrocity, and their labor was therefore exploited. So now lynching starts to feel a bit different, doesn't it? It's not just about how some group of individuals felt about black people, it's that the ruling class created, promoted, and perpetuated ideology that instigates hatred via superficiality to justify the exploitation of free labor via the total commodification of human beings, and later why a group of formerly enslaved people had a total lack of generational wealth or resources that could be utilized to achieve any kind of upward mobility.
Now, is that really totally disconnected from institutionalized power? Just something a mob did in a fit of passion? I don't really think so. I think that's a situation where, due to a false consciousness, a justifying ideology, lynching worked to make their world make sense, which, to be clear, I think is very bad.
Now, canceling is obviously not something to put on the same level as lynching. To different extents, however, I believe they both serve to seemingly democratize the authority to punish, to put people in their true place on behalf of the social order in a similar way. Sometimes this means attacking people who have done reprehensible things, and sometimes it means attacking people who have contradicted the hegemonic ideology. Most importantly, the character of cancel culture is unique to our time. Specifically, a system of market incentives results in consumer-like behaviors which integrate with a diffusion of authority among those who accept the ruling class's ideology, as I said in part 1.
This is why we need that app I just talked about where we can leave reviews of guys we've dated on Hinge, because then I don't have to make this subtle video trying to warn this girl.
Further, most of the participants don't really know they're participating in this capacity, so do they really have a choice? I'd say no. So in a way, we're not just consumers, we're also kind of prisoners. If you built a prison as a big circle, you wouldn't need guards walking around monitoring every corner, hallway, nook, and cranny, because there are no crannies. You're not going to find a cranny, I promise. Look for the crannies, there's none. You might have one or two guards in a tower in the middle looking around, but you certainly wouldn't need a large number of them patrolling. These guards can look out and around and see everything, and so can the prisoners, who, in a way, act as guards as well, either intentionally or not. You see, anything they might do to call attention to a situation serves a similar function as a guard. The literal structure I'm talking about, the panopticon, was designed as a prison by Jeremy Bentham in the 1800s. However, it isn't necessarily as a physical structure that it became a topic of discussion. In fact, it's been widely used as a metaphor for the structure of a totalitarian state in which people are never 100% sure if they're being watched. We can see this everywhere, from critical theory like Foucault's Discipline and Punish to fiction like George Orwell's 1984. So, imagine the panopticon as an app.
Something important is happening now. Like, right now.
But do people, just go to prison? Just because? For the hell of it? No. Obviously not. And this is the same reason I don't think I'd intentionally download an app billed as a means to observe and report on my fellow citizens, which also ensures I'm subject to the same observing and reporting myself. Unless I get something out of it.
Likes and favorites, retweets, subscribers, followers and followers and followers and validation and attention. Attention's currency in the marketplace of ideas.
Actually, genuinely, I don't just say that for effect. I like that punk song.
All these metrics we see on social media posts act as a form of psychological cash. They all behave a little differently, but the allure is in accumulating these metrics, building social connections, fame. Of course, few actually accumulate so much attention currency that it has a definitive impact in terms of real-world upward mobility, but hey, it could happen, right?
Doesn't change the 5-star man who he is.
When we talk about cancel culture, as I said earlier, we're at least partially talking about a desire that otherwise powerless people have for justice. In some respects, it can kind of feel like a means to gain some power. And if you have power, you can change things, right? That power is only relative to the space that is Twitter, subsets of people within its user base, and the target that it's being exerted on. It is not power that can be exerted onto Twitter Inc. or the capitalists that own everything.
So the results that cancel culture can produce are hyper-specific and reliant on the amount and quality of social connections, or just plain old capital, the target has. To understand what we're doing when we cancel someone, we have to view the target as the neoliberal capitalist paradigm wants us to view everything, as a commodity.
Specifically, we must understand that we see an image of a person's behavior and intellectually subscribe to consume more of that image. Of course, no legal tender is paid for this subscription. We've already established that social media works as a form of social market, paying out attention as currency in the form of metrics as a reward for the labor of making their site interesting.
Now, this is the justifying ideology of our economic base, manifesting in and mediating our social relationships. We subscribe to a person. That is, we give them our attention as a sort of abstract currency in the form of engagement, as we consume the image of that person doing and saying things that we want them to.
When the actual person behind the commodified image we see does things that contradict the version of them we're subscribed to, we cancel our subscription to that person. We cease to consume them and cease to contribute to their engagement metrics. We reject them as a thing we are willing to exchange attention for, and further, we look at them with some form of disgust for failing to uphold their end of whatever bargain we thought we had with them.
Remember, the customer is always right. And that feels a bit like power.
It is, as I said before, a very relative form of power, though, as these markets are abstract, ideological, and specific. The effect they have is almost entirely internal, and it is fairly difficult to convert social connections there into currency or capital elsewhere. So, cancel culture's real power is relative to, number one, how much capital the target has, and number two, how much capital the attackers have or can gain support from.
I think cancel culture is an integrated part of capitalist life, which, through neoliberal ideology, converts more and more of our interactions into transactions.
Here, most specifically, via social media metrics. Because of this dynamic, I think we should see cancel culture not as a vigilante strategy, not as some form of populist mob justice, and not in whatever way someone dubbed terminally online might characterize it,
but rather as incentivized behavior in an attention economy which drives engagement for platform holders and therefore generates profit dependent on the whims of institutionalized power.
Yes, cancel culture looks like a mob descending on someone, which is pretty convenient for platform owners. This enables them to absolve themselves of all responsibility as people stay on their website, endlessly check for replies, sift through content obsessively, and hurl abuse at each other, often because someone deviated from a mainstream narrative. That's engagement, you see. In their eyes, that is an active community that they can commodify, either through ads and promotions or by selling the data that's generated. At most, they regard it as a pleb or a group of plebs simply ceasing to engage with someone or something while loudly requesting that the platform owner bring down the axe, like one might do with a show. Remember #CancelColbert? It's like that, but for a person or brand. Ultimately, the owners choose what to do, even if indirectly. If someone or something is convenient and beneficial for the status quo, it is less likely to be successfully canceled. Now, it can be less straightforward. The request may not be directed to the platform, but to someone in a sub-platform like a quote-unquote community. What this person occupying a sub-platform does is still dependent on the main platform's institutional power, though, as their actions would have no weight without it. The account, the community, and any kind of sub-platform only exist because the platform holders allow it. You don't own a platform, you have permission to use one. If someone calls out a prominent person in, I don't know, like the sewing community, and the sewing community cancels them, that's still the institutional power of the main platform being exerted, as all the power the sewing community is using to cancel the target is relevant only to and derived from the main platform.
To put it in a simpler way, without Twitter, no one has Twitter followers.
The power one might hold on a platform has only one source: the platform. This is entirely under the control of the platform, as that power can be revoked for any reason. This is ultimately how the free market works too. It's not about supplying things people demand, it's about using power to appropriate commodities. The market isn't about everyday consumers and what they want, but what the class of people who own everything wants. We don't mean shit in the market. Bill Gates does. A lot of people conflate democracy and the market as well. You know, voting with your dollars. Well, Jeff Bezos has way more votes than normal people and will as long as the economic base functions like this. Is that not a problem? An atomized society that is primarily thinking about how to pay bills is a pretty ideal scapegoat, so the solution for society's ills is purported to be things like making better choices.
Eating vegan helps animals. Driving a Tesla helps the environment. Not buying from Amazon does something. Not nothing. Something.
On top of that, we're competing, not only in the labor market, but as consumers attempting to get or keep a position of consequence within all the little niche social markets they want us to call communities. So we tend to trust only ourselves, which leads to a lot of snap judgments based on the first information we're presented with.
Am I describing cancel culture, or am I describing marketing? Tee-hee, I'll never tell.
In this atomized, competitive, transactional, abstract, subscription-based social dynamic, it's easy to view other people like yourself as an antagonistic force, while the platform itself quietly facilitates it. It's set up like that for a reason.
There's a funny thing about people who genuinely view capital as an antagonistic force, lording its power above us. People who see things that way aren't exactly easy to market to.
But when you don't view capital as an antagonistic force, you, yourself, all your activity, and the data it generates are pretty much just a workable business model. Algorithms are owned by people and are made to serve their owners' interests. Algorithms are created by people. They shape reality for millions of people and are intrinsically tied to both making money and preserving their owners' rule. They are a means of production, and you are the product. These are situations we have little say in. Our existence and even minuscule amounts of success in a capitalist society necessitates our participation in incentivized action to at least some extent, whether it's a conscious decision or even an option. This is what power demands. These dynamics are part of the coercion that keeps an imperial stage capitalist society, one imminently in decay, running.
Either you're doing this stuff or you don't get food and shelter.
Contempt we're compelled to feel for other individuals, people also trying to get somewhere in this modern gladiator arena, keeps us from confronting the alienation and atomization of contemporary society. We are together alone, connected via the barriers that keep us apart. Our alienation itself is commodified. We aren't free, but there's no need to hold us in a cell. We're prisoners in an open-air panopticon. With every breath, we inhale the environment created by people with more power than us. Our lungs take what they can use from it and push the rest back out of our bodies, ever surrounding ourselves with the fluid imprisonment that is capitalism. And we're distracted from it by the pretend power we're promised for observing and reporting on everyone else doing the same thing, living the same life. So, is cancel culture a leftist thing?
The goal of cancel culture is to make decent Americans live in fear of being fired, expelled, shamed, humiliated, and driven from society as we know it. The far left wants to coerce you into saying what you know to be false and scare you out of saying what you know to be true. It's very sad.
Well, no. It's neoliberal social dynamics in an imperial capitalist society. And it's perhaps pretty damning of the effectiveness of so-called leftism, but it's everyone canceling everyone.
These ideologies don't achieve justice. In fact, in observing these dynamics, we can see how perverted an ideal like justice can become without material grounding. It's not simply that we want justice or fairness or equality. These are subjective ideals without hard distinctions that are difficult to obscure with ideology. That thing that you want in your mind can mean whatever those with power want it to. This is why I continually stress that class is dichotomized along a material basis. What makes a low-paid worker different from a high-paid worker is quantity. The quality, the character that makes them a worker isn't. Even a high-paid worker isn't an owner. They can be thrown away at any time, and that's that, just like any other everyday person. And the instant any worker of any level of income ceases to be useful for the capitalists for one reason or another, well, let's just say they're in a pretty vulnerable position.
Cancel culture's appearance of democratizing accountability is what I think transforms we the people into a mix of consumer, marketer, police, judge, jury, prisoner, and guard. It transforms a desire the powerless have for an impossible justice into a commodity, so not only do the powerful avoid scrutiny, they profit. Which seems like a cross-section of the capitalist ruling class's two favorite pastimes to me.
That's all fun, Peter, but obviously none of it really matters. No one's ever really canceled, right? It's all just a bunch of people pissing into their own mouths on social media, right? Yeah. No one's ever really canceled, except those that are. So if cancel culture is an example of the market made manifest in social relations, and the hegemonic ideology falsely suggests that it is fair for the bourgeoisie to own and run things, well, does canceling do anything? And if it does, to whom? I'll answer that question with another, simpler question. Can you cancel Jeff Bezos? Obviously, you can't. You can cancel someone with no relevant institutional power or connections, though. It's really not even hard to cancel a random individual working class person. You just have to create a perception, either based on evidence or not, that they have deviated from what is considered acceptable and petition relevant institutional power to cut the target off. You can get an employee fired, you can get a vulnerable community member thrown out. But even with the total destruction of Harvey Weinstein's reputation, the bankruptcy of the company he owned following backlash, massive legal fees, a $19 million settlement with his accusers, a divorce, and a 23-year prison sentence, he still has in his possession, at this very moment, $25 million. However, the vast majority of canceling doesn't involve the legal system, so the apparatus that got levied against him is technically the big guns. Harvey Weinstein is now a convicted rapist who lost around $470 million due to his actions and still has the capital to easily start a company and make another fortune, or just chill and live in luxury the rest of his life. If we're voting with our dollars, that convicted rapist sitting in prison at this very moment has significantly more votes than everyone watching this video put together. And like I said, for the bouge, it doesn't usually go that far. If someone has institutional power or backing, they can't really be canceled unless that power vanishes or whatever institution backs them revokes their backing, which, don't get me wrong, can happen. Like with Milo Yiannopoulos, who conservatives did cancel for a while by totally revoking their involvement with him and budgets for him. They did eventually get over that and bring him back, though, despite the fact many pretend they haven't. Milo hosts a Christian shopping network now.
Yes. Really.
When people get canceled, they get taken off the market. A cancel campaign is a collective of small-time buyers at the consumer level committing to revoke their buying power, their subscription to the human content, and engaging in a crowdsourced marketing campaign to enlist more consumers to do the same. To continue this metaphor, we might liken an individual without institutional power or backing to independent content funded entirely through something like Patreon, while someone with institutional power or backing is more like content available on Netflix. You could probably fuck up most Patreon-supported creators' lives if you got a few hundred people to commit to unsubscribe. But you're probably not going to get Netflix to do anything by getting a few hundred people to unsubscribe because they made a movie for pedophiles. No, the liberals really should not have defended this. Wow. But consumer activism, as I've said to them a million times, doesn't do anything. At least not to these huge corporate entities. The mainstream conception of cancel culture is that it's simply a popular backlash to public wrongdoing, either real or imagined. But if canceling actually was that, we wouldn't even still be talking about Donald Trump or Joe Biden for that matter at all, because both have done a whole lot of wrong in the public eye, generating a lot of backlash. Again, cancel culture is a set of dynamics which developed out of neoliberal capitalist society that mirror a subscription model and have power relative to all involved parties' capital.
So the mainstream conception of cancel culture is clearly untrue, and That makes it seem worthwhile to talk about to me.
Also, even if you think the cancel culture conversation is stupid, a whole lot of people care about cancel culture. And funny enough, despite the whole thing being a logical conclusion of the justifying ideology of this system, they don't love it. According to polling, 56% of Americans view cancel culture as a big problem, while only 13% don't think it's a problem at all. Everyone in between views it as some degree of a problem.
Now, it's hard, but I try not to simply blame individuals for something that happens systemically, because I don't think people who are customarily engaging in current social paradigms are really to blame.
As I said earlier, a lot of these people thirst for some form of justice, a counterweight to the wrongdoing we all see in this world on a constant basis. In a way, it quenches that thirst like seawater, in that it doesn't do that.
It's also really bad for your kidneys, too, because to get the extra salt out of your system, you have to pee more than you drink. Eventually, if you keep drinking seawater, you die of dehydration for that specific reason.
The Know Your Place Bitch version of justice sets the stage for the trial supposedly by public opinion, ultimately producing a commodified image of people being put in their place. Sometimes it simply begins and ends with outrage. Sometimes it gets swallowed by culture war and forced to conform to the liberal versus conservative team sports paradigm, and everyone argues about it until every ounce of validation juice has been squeezed from the fruit.
Yo, you suck on these nuts!
Sometimes it turns into a bizarre collective obsession, like with West Elm Caleb, an entry-level designer at a furniture company who a number of women in NYC with TikTok accounts matched with, texted, or went on awkward dates with.
Hello, villains. Mama Villain is back, and I'm like, Kate, it's your duty as a woman to give this timeline. Okay, so let's get into it. So I matched with this boy on Hinge last week. I was like, okay, another dude to add to my arsenal. It's fine.
A few minutes later.
She was with Caleb Saturday morning. Caleb and I went on a date at 3 p.m. on Saturday. The audacity of a straight white man with a fucking mustache. The audacity. Another dude to add to my arsenal.
Now, to your surprise and mine, West Elm Caleb actually ended up ghosting these women.
I wasn't going to make a video about this, but I feel like it's my duty as your Asian older sister to warn my New York City girls about this Caleb from West Elm ASAP.
This turned into millions of people on TikTok obsessively stalking this man, posting private information about his job, location, and other things. Someone claimed they saw him in line waiting for a COVID test and even joked about harassing him. Commenters on that post cheered her on. Brands happily exploited the situation, telling people to use checkout code WestElmCaleb if you've ever dealt with jerks on dating apps, as well as TikTok itself directly spurring on the engagement in a now deleted tweet. Sometimes it ends even more horrifically, like that time a teenager drew a Steven Universe character with the wrong body type, thin rather than big, and attempted suicide after the way people reacted to it.
Or that one time that guy cheated in marathons and people stalked him and attacked him until he actually did commit suicide. A lot of people were involved just saying, hey, just admit it and it'll be over. And I mean, that's not how it works, but why were they involved in that capacity? Ask yourself, why does it matter? Is this guy killing himself justice? Does this mean justice really is just know your place, bitch? Did the guy killing himself change anything about the world? Did it make people's lives any better? Yeah, I'm going to answer that one for you. No. What it did do was get a bunch of people involved in a suicide that ultimately occurred over marathon times.
And obviously, no one's going to die from canceling other people. That said, this so-called cancel mob also suffers as social bonds are harder to form in an increasingly competitive quote-unquote community in an increasingly atomized society. Neoliberalism is an ideology that is just fundamentally anti-society. To say the most obvious possible thing, when people are turned against each other, they forget what they have in common. The atomized individual actor is the unit neoliberalism breaks society down into, and painting moral targets among the people works to keep them from collectivizing against power. It's a road-tested strategy. Divide and conquer. Keep the barbarians fighting with each other.
Given, I think, this is all a logical outcome of neoliberalism, some might be tempted to think that all we need to do is change neoliberalism. But if that's all we did, another ideology would emerge to continue justifying capitalism or some form of class society in its place. The root cause is what has to be addressed. The primary class contradiction, the socialization of production without socializing who the final product and the profit go to. Neoliberalism isn't something separate from capitalism. It's the ideology that makes capitalism as it exists right now seem okay. I don't believe cancel culture is somehow separate from that. Everything about the world right now, including neoliberalism and capitalism itself, is the result of a sequence of events that has already happened. We live in the result. We can't undo history and go back to whatever version of capitalism some people think is the real one. Nor can we return to Monkey, resetting the world to some mythical point where society was communal and perfect. This result begets action, which begets another result. The question is when and how. There's a reason why life feels so transactional today. It's that today's society values the accumulation of capital by a ruling class over everyone and everything else. It's not because this generation is greedy, entitled, or whatever thing people think to justify their ideological perception of themselves. It's that production is the source of power in a society where modern conditions of production persist. A class owns the means to produce, and its power is used to mold society. If a social narrative that justifies this to at least most people isn't created and perpetuated, the help gets rowdy. Incentivizing that help to direct their rowdiness at each other and making a ton of money from the engagement it generates, that's what cancel culture is. It reflects the character of the system, capitalism, and its justifying ideology, the market fetishizing ideas of neoliberalism. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think being a hall monitor is fun. I don't think it's enjoyable to spend my time looking at other people, figuring out what they're doing wrong so I can present it to my followers and reap the rewards. I don't like that. Sure, yeah, people should be accountable for their actions, but what is accountability? When we're given specifications by which to construct our realities with, when we're only shown the version of everything that serves the owning class, are we really the driving force behind our decisions? Are we able to be accountable for a decision that is made under those coercive circumstances? Cancel culture is real. But it's not simply a modern form of ostracism in which someone is thrust out of professional or social circles. It's capitalism itself, ideologically manifesting in our social relationships. And you know what? It's time to tell that third wheel, capitalism, that we are out together. This is our time. And if that doesn't work, we really need to try to find capitalism a date or something, because seriously, capitalism is really cramping our style, boo. Yeah, I wear tactical gear on dates. So what? I'm dating communism, and we're super cute together. Take the hint, capitalism.
Ask yourself, will I burn in hell? Then write it down and cast it in the well. There they are. The mob it cries for blood to twist the tail into firewood. Fan the flames with a little lie. Then turn your cheek until the fire dies. The skin it peels like the truth away. What it was, I will never say. the wind.